It's the Yukon Polypopcast, a podcast where we talk about politics and popular culture. I'm here with Professor Jeff Dudas. I'm Professor Stephen Dyson. And Jeff, I got to do something. I can't believe I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
Us two characters are going to discuss the Top Guns.
'I'm gonna send you up against the best. Yes, sir. You two characters are going to Top Gun.
I feel the need for speed.
+30 years of service. Combat medals, citations. Only man to shoot down 3 enemy planes in the last 40 years. Yet you can't get a promotion, you won't retire. Despite your best efforts, you refuse to die. You should be at least a 2-star admiral by now. Yet here you are. Captain. Why is that?
It's one of life's mysteries, sir.
I feel the need for
The Top Guns. So we are discussing today both Top Gun, the 1986, and Top Gun: Maverick, the 2022 movie. You, my friend, must first answer the most important question.
Yes.
What's your call sign?
Is cringe?
Cringe. Call sign cringe.
Because both for that intro, of which I was also a material
witness,
and for a great many of the scenes in the original Top Gun, which I truly did cringe my way back through again this time. Yeah.
I think your call sign is Jeff.
Yeah. Yes.
Whereas mine is big. I don't know. Big Daddy. That was a British wrestler, actually. I mean, it would fit with my nationality. No. This is the thing. I read this thing about the call signs, which in Top Gun Maverick, aside from Bob, call sign Bob, are all like heroic. It's like, strong guy, killer man. I read that actual pilots' call signs are much more likely to be either workaday or kind of little like digs, like clumsy or half-ass or something along those lines.
Interesting.
So that's interesting.
Yeah,
that's interesting. Trivia point number 1.
Yeah.
What is not trivial is our views or our experiences with the Top Gun franchise. We diverge rather markedly, I think, especially with regards to the first movie, which you don't like.
I don't like it very much, no.
And was this a visceral reaction you had upon first seeing it?
No, so Top Gun comes out in 1986, and I did not see it in the theaters. I was 11 years old at the time, but I did see it when it immediately came out on VHS. And of course, to me, the lasting pop culture memento from Top Gun is Kenny Loggins' song "Danger Zone."
Oh yeah,
which
classic,
was all over the top 40 radio that summer. I only saw Top Gun once. Even at 11, I didn't think much of it. It's not anything that I was ever compelled to go back and rewatch. I, in a lot of ways, had completely forgotten about this movie and was more than a little bit surprised when they made a remake or when they did a second sequel. So when I went back and rewatched it now, it was truly the first time I had seen these scenes in 35 years. And some of them remain just as cringe-inducing and difficult to get through as I remembered. The most obvious of which is the Righteous Brothers what is that, Serenade, I suppose. So no, I think in our discussions leading up to this, I can have come to appreciate maybe the movie a little bit more, but I appreciate it a lot more as the setup for Top Gun Maverick, which I actually think is a significantly better and legitimately good movie. But what about you? I mean,
love it.
So you're what are you, 7 or 8 at the time?
I'd have been 8 years old. I definitely wouldn't have gone to the cinemas at all.
So when did you see it?
It must have been on TV or something. But then at some point, everyone has seen Top Gun. I mean, that's why there was a sequel, because it just suffused.
I mean, is that
culture.
true? I don't know if that's true. That was one of the reasons why I was so surprised that there was a sequel, is because I feel like I hadn't heard anything about Top Gun. I don't feel like it ever did the kind of the nostalgia rounds where, a bit of pop culture ephemera just inexplicably becomes really popular again. Tom Cruise becomes incredibly important and incredibly popular.
Yeah, and it's one of his kind of star-making roles, isn't it?
But otherwise, and it's very important for Bruckheimer and Simpson. Right?
Yep, the producers, and for Tony Scott, the director. Right. Yeah, I think in my young, male, and I think probably both of those things are important. State really connected with the story. I think it's with the character of Maverick, which I know is a character you sort of basically despise until we meet him when he's 60 again, and you find him a little more redeemable or redemptive. I think the movie is looks amazing, and Tony Scott is far from a hack director. I mean, he really does have an aesthetic sensibility, and there's it's always the kind of, what do they call it, the magic hour, like it's always sunset. He really sort of kind of creates this sort of out of time and space image of Miramar, California, which who knows what it's really like there, but it seems to be a place where no one lives. It's always dusk, and it's just kind of a playground for young men. So terrific, all into that. So aesthetically, I mean, obviously, the fighter sequences are extremely famous and in some senses kind of genre defining and show a real directorial skill. I also think that I have a real appreciation for movies that are extremely lean, in which there's not much wasted, and it's a very propulsive story. I think there's real genius in the construction of the movie. I mean, the bookends of the two sequences on the aircraft carrier, which are a war movie, and then the middle of it, which is basically like a sports movie, right? They all go off and they play a tournament against each other, and I think to this young man, there was something particularly sort of appealing about this notion of these guys going off to what seemed like summer camp, right? Where they do a little bit of school, but mostly they're doing cool stuff, like essentially racing go-karts, and then they have social events, and then they go to the beach and kind of get lubed up and so forth, and all this stuff I just thought was like tremendous fun, absolutely fantastic. And I think this is something we'll discuss in a section of the podcast we've typically called mythologies and archetypes, where we talk about Maverick as a heroic character and maybe some notions of masculinity. And this may be an area where I just have not examined the toxicity in that character, and that's something we can talk about. But as a younger man, Maverick's heroism really appealed to me, and I did not see him in either movie, and here we differ, as a crass, one-dimensional figure. I always saw him as someone who had tremendous redemptive qualities. Like, he's obviously kind of a jackass, and he's obviously showboats and all the rest of it, and I totally get that. And there are elements of the movie, particularly the first movie, where his behavior is clearly like way out of bounds and illegal. And I don't mean in any sense to condone that, which I think is a product of its time and of a set of norms that thankfully have moved on. But as a character, I find him to be kind of multidimensional. I find him to be very loyal to his friends, somewhat selfless in the way that he puts himself on the line, someone with tremendous sort of inner pain and vulnerability, and someone, and this is something we should explore later in the podcast, someone who is acted upon by a system that's pretty evil, rather than being a sort of willing or fully knowledgeable agent of a system, a political and military system that I think is pretty evil.
We'll talk about all of this.
I think I convinced him. In the first 5 minutes, it's now your favorite movie.
Points. Just thinking back, my impression of the movie at the time was it really didn't make any impression.
No.
I can't say that I hated it.
Yeah.
But it just felt insubstantial to me. And I was certainly not, I was 11 and I was totally into action movies and, big hero stories and blowing stuff up. And for whatever reason, the movie did not capture my imagination at all.
Yeah.
And as I said, I'd never felt any inclination to go back and re-engage it. That's interesting too, I think, and it's probably worth dwelling a little bit later on the larger context, historically and culturally, into which this movie emerges in the mid-1980s, that might have something to do with it as well.
Yeah, I think so.
But, and I wonder if, just to preface what we might talk about later, I wonder if the fact that its placement at the very end of the Cold War is actually important in that way.
Yeah.
Because a lot of what's happening there does require an imaginative investment in a kind of a bipolar superpower world, right? And so when that world dissolves really almost instantaneously after the release of the movie, I do wonder if there's something there that it loses any of its kind of emotional pull.
Yes.
In a larger sense.
Right. Should we get into our usual categories? Okay, so this is a podcast about politics and popular culture, and we usually try and address the politics of a work of popular culture, in this case the Top Guns, in three dimensions, at three levels. A kind of surface level politics, where we'd look at the explicit political references that are made in the text, a section we tend to call mythologies and perhaps archetypes, where we talk about some of the deeper cultural and societal structures that are reflected in the movie, and then a section we call critique, where we try and either take an against the grain reading, or we look at what the movie is implicitly or explicitly opposing or offering as an alternative to the current state of events. So that leaves us with section number 1, surface level politics. Surface level politics in topic. Here's my first question, call sign Jeff. Does World War III start at the end of Top Gun?
It doesn't appear to. One of the things that, we talked a little bit about this in prep, one of the things that is interesting about both of these movies, but especially about the first one, is just how self-contained the story is. There is almost no allusion at any point in the movie to a kind of a wider world of politics or geopolitical struggle or strategy or any of the kinds of things that you would expect to at least accompany the storytelling here. So it's really hard to even... I just watched Top Gun the other night, and to be honest, I have a hard time remembering what the actual conflict is at the end of the movie that they are rushed into
in the first movie?
Resolve in the first movie.
So it's in the Indian Ocean.
Okay.
Of course, that hotspot of somewhere in the Indian, that specific location in that geopolitical hotspot. And I think they said like a surveillance vessel has become disabled and drifted into enemy waters. And there's going to be a rescue mission, and they have to fly air cover for the rescue mission.
Okay, I'm sure that's right. But you just saying that, like, I just...
You didn't.
I really couldn't even. I had
What's
no
his
idea.
name? The Baldy, Stinger, the commander of the aircraft carrier, gives that speech.
Okay.
A man who, by the way, is the sweatiest individual you've ever seen. But actually, the whole universe of Top Gun, the first, is the sweatiest movie in this. Like, everyone is sweating all the time. It's incredible.
Yeah. And it's supposed to be in San Diego, which is, of course, famously moderate in its climate.
Right. But it's like people are losing, their body weight in sweat every 16 seconds, and which is why they're always in the damn shower or queuing up to get in the shower, constantly.
Multiple masters can be served.
Exactly.
That kind of compulsive toplessness.
Exactly. So yes, the movie ends politically on a note of triumph, right? Which is the fighter pilots all return, and Maverick and Isa are friends, but they did just kill a lot of.
Right.
There was just a shooting pecking war.
Right, 3 MiGs, right?
Right, and they shot down whoever was flying with ice at first.
Yeah.
Right? That's why Maverick... So, I didn't get the sense that crisis was over.
But no, you wouldn't. On the other hand, we don't really know. The movie doesn't care.
Yes.
Right, the movie doesn't care about that crisis. It doesn't care about anything except this highly insular naval world. It's not even the military world, really, when you think about it. It's this very insular naval world that consists of aviation only. It's not even the wider Navy.
Right.
I mean, we get very little sense of how the Navy as a larger institution even works, right? Everything is fixated on this small group of pilots and their immediate superiors.
Well, and on this one aircraft carrier, right? Which actually there is a nice callback. There's this old thing in Star Trek, which is why is the Enterprise always the only ship in the sector? Yeah. Right. Where the heck is the rest of Starfleet? Yeah. And you will have missed this because you haven't watched the first movie as obsessively as I did. That aircraft carrier is the Enterprise. In Stinger's office, there's a little hat that says USS Enterprise. So that was a nice little. I don't know if that was deliberate or not.
I'm sure it was.
Yeah, exactly. But it's yes, you're right. It's this hermetically sealed world of just these few pilots, which in a sense, the line that the writers of both movies have always given is that we were trying to avoid coming up with a specific enemy because we don't want to make a political statement. Right. Well, I don't know if this is a discussion for now or for our section on critique, but having a non-specific enemy and yet there is constantly an enemy is itself a rather profound political statement.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's very sort of Orwellian, right? Like today we're at war with Eurasia and tomorrow we're at war with Oceania. No one ever acknowledges that there was ever any resolution to the prior conflict.
And it's somehow a geopolitical set of controversies that don't ever have any reverberating impact.
Yes.
They don't make any difference. None of this matters.
Right.
I mean, it's that old trick that, sometimes talk about where the screenwriter creates this world that then resolves. Right,
yeah.
With no impact.
Yes.
We were talking about Rogue One.
Yeah, like this sort of self-disassembling machine.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what you get here.
Yes.
So there is a politics to that, though. Right? It's maybe not announcing, obviously, that the Soviets are the enemy, but it's pretty obvious. I mean, any audience in 1986 would absolutely understand that this was at least a proxy conflict between the United States.
Well, and then MiGs, which was the Soviet aircraft, and there is a red star on the, so it's they went a lot further, I think, in the first movie to identifying an enemy than they did in the second movie, where they deliberately didn't. Now, it's clearly in the second movie the enemy is like a rogue state.
It's claimed to be a rogue state.
So it's clearly supposed to be like Iran or North Korea or someone along those lines.
Right. But the best we can do is use the topography as a clue for where
it's mountainous.
It's mountainous and it's snow fallen.
Yeah.
So, it could be North Korea. It could be someplace in Asia.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, I think so. So I have a couple of quotes on this sort of nondescript nature of the enemy. Viper is Tom Skerritt's character. By the way, I'm extremely disappointed we didn't do the mustache thing.
I'm not.
The plan a couple of weeks ago was I would try and grow as fast as I could, and shave down to a mustache, and then Jeff, who already was facially haired, would get a mustache.
Let's be clear, dear
goose,
viewers.
rooster,
this was not the plan.
Viper
this was
type thing.
Steven's idea that it was a flitting idea that kind of crossed his mind. And
it wasn't flitting. It was
as soon as he proposed it, I absolutely kiboshed it.
So
it was not a plan.
But Top Gun did a huge amount to make mustaches cool again. I might still go down that road. But anyway, Viper in the first movie, he says to the Top Gun you students, in their first meeting, we don't make policy, elected officials do. We are the instruments of that policy. But then here's the real kicker. We have to act like we are always at war.
Yeah.
Which, again, this is probably more critique than surface level politics. I don't think it's what the filmmakers were trying to say, but there is a view of America and the American military-industrial complex that suggests that there is a clear reason why you are told to act like you're always at war, because there are pretty powerful interests that would like that to always be the case.
Yes.
And it doesn't really matter who the enemy is, and it's not going to resolve itself anyway. Joseph Kosinski, the director of Top Gun Maverick, the themes are very universal. We're not pointing at a specific enemy. We're not making a political statement. Not sure that's true. Yeah. We're just trying to tell this very honest story about a guy struggling with some things things in his life set against the backdrop of this incredibly demanding, exciting job. I think there's a little more going on in both movies than those quotes would lead you to think. What do you... So 1986.
Yep.
This is the height of Reaganism.
Yep.
Subject on which you're, an expert. And a time, and this is of course tied up with the height of Reaganism, where in military and cultural terms there is a tremendous effort by the conservative establishment, certainly, to push beyond the shame of Vietnam, quote unquote, or the perceived lessons of Vietnam.
Post-Vietnam syndrome.
Precisely, which is we shouldn't be proud of the military, and the militaries can't solve problems, and an attempt to be more, self-confident.
Well, and also this line for Reagan, it was all about, and you hear this still a lot now with recollections of the period, that the problem with Vietnam, according to Reagan, was not that the cause was unjust. It was not that structurally it was impossible. The problem is that the military's hands had been tied.
Yeah.
Right, that in particular civilian policymakers had made it impossible for Americans to win. Now, anybody who knows actually anything about Vietnam knows that is just flagrantly untrue, right? And it's just a bizarre, bonkers reading of what was actually happening at the time. But that kind of that notion that you've got military people who have had their hands tied and disrespected, and their expertise has been overlooked or frowned upon. This is what's responsible for this kind of haunting national tragedy that is supposedly giving rise in the late 1970s to this so-called period of malaise, of national malaise. And here there's always a lot of reference made to Jimmy Carter's speech about the malaise and the loss of self-confidence, which is typically linked to, the struggles in Vietnam, right? And so what Reagan is doing is he's trying to almost super inject a dose of confidence into the nation, because in his cinematic vision, this is what you do, right? When people are feeling down and out, when the military and the nation has suffered a kind of a catastrophic, gaping, traumatic wound, well, the way you suture it up is you just, you start getting really aggressive and robust, and you puff up your chest and you proclaim yourself back and fit for duty.
Yes.
Right? Which, by the way, is what they all want Maverick to do after Goose dies.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely. So Vietnam comes up in a couple of explicitly in a couple of places in the story. There's the failure in Vietnam is presented within the eyes of the military leadership as basically a failure of technique.
Yeah.
Right. And the problem in Vietnam was our pilots had become lazy, and they'd lost the traditional dogfighting skills, and this is why we have Top Gun now, and we gotta get the kill ratio back up from 3-1 as it was in Vietnam to something like it had been in the age of aces.
World War II,
yeah. And then Vietnam comes up also. They don't say the words Vietnam, but the time period makes it almost impossible that it was anything else. When Viper finally explains to Maverick what happened to his father, and the military had told Maverick a story that his dad had screwed up, and that's why he was dead, and he was a mess up, and Maverick, Viper eventually tells Maverick, like, no, I flew on that mission, I was with your father was a hero, and we were on a secret mission, or we got lost behind enemy lines.
Which is almost certainly a reference to Cambodia.
Yes,
right.
Yeah. So that they're the areas in which Vietnam shows up. So do you read Top Gun, the Top Gun, in that way, as a triumphalist Reagan era shake-off Vietnam movie?
I think there's definitely some of that there.
Yeah.
Right, and I think it's, as we'll talk about, there's more there.
Yeah.
That can be read at a different level, but absolutely, this is one of those movies where we often talk about the surface level politics as stuff that's kind of obvious and straightforward and not particularly interesting, and actually maybe not even what the text is really about. But I think this is one of those texts in which a great deal of work, a great deal of interpretive and meaningful work is being done at the surface.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is not necessarily an indictment of the screenwriter. It's not an indictment of Tom Cruise's performance, which I am convinced is a bit more subtle than it initially appears. The reason I say that is because I don't see how any audience member, the 99% of the people who would watch this movie would come out of that movie, Top Gun, with anything more than this kind of rah-rah triumphalist image.
Yeah.
All right. at some level, it doesn't matter what you intend. It's what the audience gets out of it. And everything is set up, it seems to me, in Top Gun for that to be the takeaway message.
Yes.
So it's highly political.
Yes, and in support of that point, there is the famous statistic that there's like a 5,000% increase in recruitment of the Navy after Top Gun. And I don't know if this is apocryphal or if it's true, but apparently the Navy set up recruiting stations, inside multiplexes when the movie was out. And there's lots of people from that era Americans who are in college or whatever have stories of the guy in the dorm who watched Top Gun and then went off to join the ROTC or whatever. Yeah. I think there is I'm convinced that is the Bruckheimer Simpson, who were the producers, intention for the movie, because they were associated with a lot of movies in that era that made that point, or made a point about a conservative America that was muscular and forward looking and so forth, and they did have a lot of influence on what was going on in Top Gun, and of course the Pentagon themselves were deeply involved in the movie. I think we'll talk about in critique that I read the movie actually in a totally different way, and maybe it's an idiosyncratic reading of mine, but I don't think Cruise and Tony Scott, the director in particular, are hackish enough to have created something that is only surface level, and I think there is a reading that is fairly profoundly anti-military, actually, even of the first movie. Pauline Kael, the famous critic, movie critic, said in her original review of Top Gun, "What is this commercial selling?" And Tony Scott had been a director of commercials. This is why he was hired to direct Top Gun. I mean, all his career had been these kind of glossy commercial, in glossy commercial work. I mean, is Pauline Kael right to see Top Gun as a commercial? And if she is, what is the answer to a question? What is being sold here?
Baby oil.
Baby oil. We must at some point. I mean, we have this outline here, and I do wonder at some point if where is the big bullet point on the
volleyball,
the beach volleyball scene?
Dodge.
I mean, maybe we should talk about it in gender politics and mythologies.
Yeah. What's the commercial selling? I mean, it's selling a lot of what we were just talking about.
Yes.
Right. It is an unintentional recruiting pitch for a kind of militarism that is meant to propel.
By the way, someone is destroying the office that's next to ours, so if you can hear this on the video, we do apologize. I mean, I hope everyone's okay in there. It sounds like a massacre.
There's a drill.
Goodness.
Something is being drilled.
Yeah.
There is a kind of compulsion here towards supporting this, a propulsive move towards Cold War politics here, right? Which is again, the other thing that's going on here is this is also when the Reagan administration is fighting a proxy war in Nicaragua, right? In the Iran-Contra war, and that's all about like being tough and confronting communism everywhere you see it. And what's needed is to take the gloves off, to loosen up the hands of the military. And of course, what causes Iran-Contra is that you've got this Congress that explicitly makes it illegal for the Reagan administration, to sell arms to the Contras. And so the whole saga, the whole scandal is all these backroom illegal deals that the Reagan administration is making with the Contras and to support the Contras. So here you've got a case study in exactly Reagan's point, at least for him, right? The military hands should be freed. American greatness depends upon a kind of a muscular foreign policy. And the problem is these kind of weak-willed, weak-kneed civilian institutions that are getting in the way. And why would you want to get in the way when you've got Top Gun pilots?
Yes.
The greatest pilots in the world. Why would you want to handcuff them?
Right. Nice. There's someone I'd like to handcuff after then. And then the office next door. Yes. We're under extreme bombardment here. The other great... my goodness. The other great line from the movie reviews of the time was dear old Roger Ebert's line where he says the flying sequences are great, but watch out for the parts where people talk to each other, which is I think pretty nice. Is there anything else we'd like to talk about in terms of surface level politics?
I think that covers it.
Okay, so we are going to move to section 2.
Yes.
Now, mythologies and archetypes.
Yes.
And we're back in a section where we talk about the mythologies and archetypes that are present in the popular culture text. I think we wanted to start with a discussion of Maverick as a character, and does he fit into any of these archetypes or mythologies, or what do we make of it?
Yeah, and because I think this is probably our largest disagreement.
Yes.
Right? And I don't even know maybe how much we disagree in the end, but I think, upon viewing the two movies back to back, I think it's pretty difficult to reconcile the two characters, the two characterizations of Maverick. They seem like different people to me. And I don't mean that just like, you grow and you're a different person when you're 60 than you are when you're 25, which I think is what you mean. They seem to me like two completely different characters. Like the kinds of things and the kinds of interactions that we see Maverick having with others in the sequel seem completely inconsistent with the sorts of interactions we see him having as a younger man. And as a viewer, I'm just dubious that somebody could change that much over the course of their life, particularly when their life circumstances haven't really changed. And so that kind of discontinuity to me is really striking, but I know you have a different read. So you see lines of continuity there.
I do. And Maverick reads to me as an internally consistent character across the two texts, and he reads to me as in the first movie a 25, 26-year-old man who's had a distinctive set of experiences, right? Who has been in largely all male competitive environments his whole life. Military environment, has been kind of ordered around and told where to go when his personality would naturally lead him to rebel against this, and there's a real tension in him because the very things that make him so valuable and so good at his job are the things that makes it hard for him to function within a hierarchical setting. And he seems to me at 60 years old as a man who is older and wiser, as one would be after 35 but again, more years of existing, and all the tremendous sort of trauma and all the rest of it that he goes through.
But as a viewer, what makes me dubious about these characters being internally consistent, being the same characters, is that what is it that has changed in Maverick's life over the course of the 35 years? What do we know as the viewer? Well, we know that he was a Top Gun instructor for like 2 months before that failed spectacularly. We know that the potentially romantic relationship that he's undertaking with Charlie at the end of Top Gun clearly went nowhere. We learn that he has been on and off again with Penny for most of his life. And there's reason to believe that it's usually Maverick who's leaving the relationship, refusing to commit, right? So still scared of adult commitment and interaction. And he's still in the exact same job, right? He hasn't grown in that way either. He's still a fighter pilot. He's still around that same kind of, context and hypermasculine environment. What has changed that would lead to growth?
So I suppose I want to reframe the points that you've made a little bit, which is to say that the characteristics you're pointing out are usually leveled as indictments against a specific type of like hyper cocky man, and the assumption is like he's not committing because he's incredibly promiscuous, and he enjoys this job because he likes blowing things up.
Well, no, it's insecurity, right? I mean,
so that's where I'm going with it.
But what has changed that would lead him for us to believe that he has become more secure?
So I don't. So to finish that point, I don't find these ostentatious displays of bravado in men to be indicative of any sort of true confidence or, you know, or real pleasure or security or hedonism or the things that they are commonly read as in indictments of toxic masculinity. I see them as signs of a profoundly damaged psyche and someone who is a victim of a patriarchal militaristic system rather than someone who's kind of living high on the hog within that system. I think he just gets older and becomes more at peace with himself, but by the time of the second movie. So what's changed?
What is the evidence of? I don't want to preview too much what we're going to talk about later. But what is the evidence that we're given as viewers that he has in fact undergone these life experiences, that he has become wiser? You don't get, your personality doesn't change. You don't become more secure just by being old, right? Change is, work that you do on yourself or different circumstances, things that lead you to recast your life in different ways. Those are the things that tend to be entryways into personal growth. And I mean, maybe those things have happened, but we don't know as viewers. There doesn't appear to be anything that would suggest that kind of avenue towards growth.
I mean, so he's lived his whole life with two defining tragedies, right? The tragedy of his father and the tragedy of the loss of his best friend. When we meet him in the second movie, he's living in like a hangar. like where does he sleep? And he clearly makes his own meals. There's no one else. Right. He doesn't have a TV. Like, what does he do all day?
Well, he has nothing, right? He has nothing.
But could he not be thinking and reflecting on his solitude? And here is, I think,
they do show him reading. He sits down and reads. Now we don't know what he's reading. Probably a technical manual.
Yes.
But maybe it's not. Maybe it's something more.
Yeah. But I think the great redeeming feature of the great tragedy of that type of insecure or ill-at-ease man who never grows up is both the damage that they inflict upon themselves, but crucially the damage they inflict upon others, right? That this can lead to abandoned children and failed relationships and strings of wrecked lives. Maverick, it seems to me, is self-aware enough at all stages in his story, in the first and the second movie, and we see the definitive proof in the second story. He's self-aware enough not to inflict himself upon others until he has reached a point, and maybe a lot of the growth is what we see in the second movie, and until he's reached a point of maturity, at which point he can commit to Penny, says, "I won't ever leave you." But this is not a character that has had a child and disappeared.
Right.
Or is on his fourth marriage, or is in the depths of a gambling addiction.
And in fairness to him, we do know, the one thing we do know that has been different about his life is that he has attempted to be a father figure for Rooster.
And in selfless ways, he's looked out for Rooster. He's also someone who, his lack of advancement in the military is presented as self-sabotage. It also can be self-knowledge. And here I think the last movie we discussed it was Wrath of Khan. Yeah. And there's some parallels with the Kirk character, and they're actually not a bad companion piece. And I was also maybe I'm just on the side of these flawed heroes or toxic males or whatever. There were indictments of Kirk in that, one, he'd abandoned a child. Yeah. Two, he'd accepted a promotion for which he was clearly unsuited, right, and was not, effective or helpful, and was resent. Now, Maverick did neither of those things. Right. He neither accepted a promotion that took him aside from his skill set, nor did he create a family, destroy a family situation. Yeah. And in fact, he devoted his time, as you said, to looking out for, to being a surrogate father. Yes. But although he's even denied the pleasures of that because Rooster resents him so much, because his surrogacy involves taking the hit for Meg Ryan's character in Rooster's sort of affections or psyche.
And it's meaningful that the movie goes out of its way to instruct us that Maverick is not Amelia's father. Yeah. Right? Yeah. The cheap way out would be some kind of sentimental reconciliation there.
And he never tried to be. Right. And in fact, the part of his growth is surely that throughout the movie at several key points, she seems older than he does.
Yes.
And she makes points that he sort of accepts instantly as valid points, and you do see his growth when he jumps out the window. And she sees that, she's like, what are you doing? I think is a pretty crucial moment.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think the evidence for, I mean, who knows, the within universe truth, but we are again left with the impression that Maverick is an extremely promiscuous man. There's no real evidence for that, right? He has two relationships. One is with Charlie, who is his older, his superior, and is in a position of professional authority over him. So I grant you, he initiates it. But if that's a toxic or bad relationship, she bears as much of the blame as he does. And the second relationship is with Penny Benjamin, who we know is a young love of his, and who he returns to. And I don't know, that there doesn't seem to be a string of.
There doesn't. The only evidence that we have that he is kind of a heartbreaker is from Meg Ryan's discussion with Charlie in the first movie. And then I think there are some allusions here and there in Maverick, but we never see him behaving in ways like that in Maverick with women. Right?
No.
And there's a real lack of that kind of. I mean, there's a real maturity, right, in the way that he's presenting himself in Maverick that does suggest that there has been a lot of meaningful growth. It's just hard to see where that growth has come from.
Yes.
Right?
Well,
Unless it's come from, his investment in Rooster's life.
I think you have to... I think to see a pattern of plausible growth, you have to be more sympathetic than you are to Maverick, and you have to see the kind of... tensions that are beneath that character that I think are there. The other thing that's changed between the two movies in terms of the gender politics is literally the gender politics, right, of the eras, and the scene where the notion of male promiscuity as a heroic characteristic, I think, was alive and well in 1986 in a way that it's just not in 20. It just wouldn't read that way. It would be like, what are you doing? So I think there's that going on. I think some very specific acts in the first movie, such as Maverick's literal sex crime in following Charlie into the bathroom, were, I imagine, read. I mean, I was too young to read it. I didn't really understand that, or was not interested.
I didn't even remember it.
I found out that relationship wholly weird as a child, and maybe it is even as an adult. But I think in 1986 it was supposed to read as, oh, this cocky guy, but the woman's secretly impressed because he's really trying hard, and what a daredevil, and I'm secretly attracted to that. Whereas I think in 2022 it reads as let's call the police, you're going to jail, you literally, And so I think there's that going on. I would say in the defense of Maverick as a character, that those kind of performative acts of attempted conquest, again, to me, do not read as real attempts, I don't know, maybe I don't know enough womenizing men. They don't read to me as sincere attempts to kind of have the physical relationship with the woman. The song, and here I'm stealing from the video that I'll put it on screen, a video we watched called Why You're Wrong About Top Gun, in which a film critic talked about Maverick as a much deeper character, largely because of Tom Cruise's portrayal, than he'd been traditionally received. This critic makes the point that singing You've Lost That Loving Feeling is something that Maverick is doing not to impress Charlie, but to impress the other male pilots. In which case Maverick is playing to a toxic masculinity rather than embodying it. And maybe that's a distinction without a difference.
I think maybe it's a distinction without a difference. But clearly that's a homo, as is most of what we see in Top Gun. It's a homoerotic kind of homosocial activity, but it's one that requires the presence of an object, right?
Yeah.
So it requires Charlie to be there, to be subjected to this, even though it's not really about her.
Right.
But compare that with the sing along in Top Gun Maverick, right? In which it's not a serenade necessarily, but it is that same Great Balls of Fire song. But it involves, I mean, who's the first person who walks up and sits next to Rooster to be a part of it? It's Phoenix, right? And so there, it's very clearly a bonding exercise, but it's not one that is freighted with this kind of, insecure masculinist energy.
Yes, and it's not one where the most prominent woman in the film must be made a sex object, right? There's no sexualization of Phoenix at all, and her gender is actually a sort of non-issue within the ambit of the movie. You mentioned homoeroticism.
Yeah.
This is another area where I think if Bruckheimer and Simpson thought they were making a conservative pro-military movie, I think Tony Scott and maybe even Tom Cruise and the other actors sort of had other ideas or put other things in the movie that made it read in a different way. Because the military of this is even prior to Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I mean, the military of 1986 is not a welcoming environment for any suggestion of homosexuality or homoeroticism. And Top Gun is, and we're not the first people to have noticed this, an enormously homoerotic movie. In two ways. One is in the way that kind of Kubrick pioneered with Dr. Strangelove in making the point about the Freudian point about the absolute collision of the death wish and the sex act that in military hardware is extremely...
And everything is phallic, right? The missiles are phallic, the jets are phallic, Right.
I mean, absolutely. And so that's absolutely present in Top Gun in a way that maybe Tony Scott intended, or maybe it's just unavoidable when you when you start filming fighter jets in a laudatory kind of way. The other is that the movie is not even subtly homoerotic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's explicitly homoerotic. There's the scene in the initial briefing when the pilots are called to Top Gun, where the recitation of the kind of dogfighting statistics in various conflicts is given by Viper, and one of the pilots says to another, like, this is giving me a hard-on, and the second pilot says, stop teasing me, and then all of a sudden the lights go up, and you see they had their arms around each other, and their arms go back to the side. It's not subtle. So there's that, and then of course there's the famous volleyball scene in which there's extensive amounts of baby oil, and these beautiful lean men are shirtless. For some reason Tom Cruise is wearing jeans. It's not entirely clear, but that has its own kind of look and homoeroticism to it. Playing with the boys is unsubtly kind of playing in the background. What should we make of this? Is this unintentional? I mean, I think not.
I think it reads again. This goes back to an earlier point that we had talked about with regard to surface level politics, right? This is also the era, as we were talking about yesterday, this is the era of roided up wrestlers who, are wearing, basically Speedos, right? And have baby oil all over each other, and they're wrestling to great fanfare and popularity.
Yes.
And this is the era of hard bodies, of male hard bodies, the era of John Rambo and Schwarzenegger. And, so there's a lot of, lingering upon male bodies and hard male bodies as a way of conveying, at least on the surface, strength, aggression, but then also a kind of like, cool and like really sort of super secure masculinity.
And that's a conservative ideal, and it's embodied in the stars of the era like Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone. But in their movies, in their star vehicles of the time, there's lingering on the hard body, but there isn't, I don't think, that homoerotic energy. You think of Predator, and you think of there's a very famous scene that's almost memeable where Schwarzenegger and is it Carl Weathers kind of they meet and they kind of clasp like that, and the camera zoom, both of them have these massive biceps, and it's very broy. And it's very like, look at my roided up biceps. It's not homoerotic, I don't think.
But the Rocky movies are, especially the relationship between Rocky and Apollo Creed, also played by Carl Weathers, and this is most obvious in the third movie.
Okay.
So it's not as exaggerated or, and again, it's the same kind of like, conflict, right? You've got half-naked men who are doing battle in a ring for performance. But... So I think that stuff is but it's also, it reads, I think, very much more obviously now as very deeply homoerotic, right? And probably intentionally so, at least on the part of maybe the screenwriter and the director.
In which case it is undercutting the surface level intentions of the producers and assuming that they're just not smart enough to to be in on the joke.
And it's worth comparing and contrasting that volleyball scene with the reprise of it in Maverick, which is the kind of
dogfight
football.
It is ludicrous. In the words of Maverick, offense and defense at the same time.
And John Hamm's character very properly responds, who's winning? And nobody knows.
No one knows. But also, John Hamm is brilliant in Maverick, because if you watch his facial expression, every time Tom Cruise does anything, he's just like he just says this perpetual what is happening here?
But so the football scene is interesting to me for a couple reasons. First of all, I was reading an article that apparently it's become a meme or not a meme. I mean, I guess Paramount released like a 25-minute unending loop of just the football scene, which has become, extremely popular on social media.
Someone needs to do a play-by-play dissection, and they need to get on the ESPN show to diagram it out.
So the scene is much less obviously homoerotic than the volleyball scene, but it's received in a way that's really playing up that, right? I mean, the movie company itself is playing up the homoerotic elements of that scene, of the sexiness of that scene. Which just goes again to, I mean, those scenes read totally differently now.
Sure.
Right? I'm not sure that most audiences would have thought twice about that football scene in 1986, which I also suspect most audiences didn't think twice in 1986 about the volleyball scene.
Yeah.
But now, right, they both are very clearly tongue-in-cheek.
Yes.
Right? And meant to, I mean, do they need to have their clothes off to play dodge fighter football or whatever? Dogfight football. No, they don't, right? But
which, I mean, surely at some point the winning strategy in dogfight football is someone gets a missile lock and it comes in from a drone and wipes them all out. Touchdown. Should we talk about I wonder if we should talk about the gender politics. I'm just looking at our timing here. We've got about 5 minutes more in this section, I think. I wonder if we should talk about gender politics more broadly. I mean, one reading of the homoeroticism of the first movie is that it is sort of intentional, but it's not meant to signify what we're taking it as, which is a sort of progressive critique of conservative or military at the time attitudes towards homosexuality. But it's intended to signify a closed circle of masculinity into which women cannot be admitted unless they are immediately sexualized and objectified. Is that I mean, that's going on in the first movie?
For sure.
Okay.
Right? I mean, there's only one woman in the movie, is Charlie. And even though she is...
Well, and Goose's wife. We don't remember her name, which is its own indictment. And she's immediately domesticated. Right. And she plays into the classical mythical archetype of providing the domestic anchor of the military man who the only one that's torn both ways has to die because he's made the fatal mistake of not being fully committed to the bros.
Yeah, so there's this there's this long line of critique in American literature that is probably most famously associated with Leslie Fiedler, in which he argues that the real through line of American literature from from, I guess, the Daniel Boone saga forward is this fear of adult relationships.
Yeah.
And the adult relationship is signified by sort of female influence, right? And that if you look at all of these characters, right, there's a reason why these classic American literature stories always consist of men going out into the wilderness by themselves, right, and kind of preparing the way for civilized expansion, but doing it in all kinds of violent and destructive ways, right? And that the thing that really, that never goes away in this sort of classic American literature is when it comes time to commit to adult, mature relationships, our hero always finds a way out.
Yeah.
Right? And because those relationships are always signified as feminine in nature, right, then quite obviously the thing to always be feared and avoided is female influence.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's what's happening, right? Because it turns out Charlie she's not an important character, right? Really, in any way, right? She doesn't, what does she do that's important to the narrative of the story? I'm being both rhetorical and literal.
Yeah. It is a good question.
Does the movie even need to have her there? Or is she just an object against which Mav's insecurities can be put on display and then potentially
precisely, and within the framework that you just elaborated, this is, I think, the strongest case for Maverick as horrible, irredeemable or obnoxious.
It's typical, right? It's typical kind of classic American masculinity.
Right. I suppose the counter. Look, I'm not to give a counter argument, rather than to necessarily sort of wholeheartedly endorse it. She's the smartest person in the movie.
But what does it get? What does it get the
precisely.
narrative?
Yeah, not
What
a huge amount.
does she offer to the story? I mean, in fact, what we're shown is that she's using her intelligence for careerist reasons, right? All she cares about is pulling whatever knowledge she can out of Maverick's life's experiences and career experiences, which she's then going to use to advance up into Washington.
But the pursuit of a career using cynical means is its own kind of feminism, isn't it? That's its own kind of agency.
But the story can be told. I mean
if she wasn't there and Meg Ryan was the only woman in the movie, it would be a more misogynist movie.
Yeah, maybe.
Right? I will say, though...
it depends on what you make out of the Charlie character, right?
Yeah.
Who does not come off well.
Yes.
Right? I think the inclination is to read her as... as just an objectified person, but she doesn't come off particularly well.
No,
right? She comes off as, in a lot of ways, just as much of an asshole as Maverick.
Yeah. And there is the horrifying, the horrible scene for her character where Goose has just died and Maverick, a traumatized Maverick, is quitting the military and leaving town, and she goes to see him and says. You've already left. All you've learned, you haven't learned anything. All you've learned to do is to... Whereas there is an argument. He's actually learned something very profound, right? Which is this life is not for me. Right. It's not worth the sacrifice. It's taken everything from me. At least while I'm still young and whole, I should go and do something else in my life. Maybe. I mean, this was actually a turning point.
Right.
And she comes in and says, "You're basically a coward."
Yeah.
She bullies him back into the military in a way that's sort of entirely heartless and just astonishing.
Right.
And I think, again, it's another way in which norms have changed towards not only gender but things like trauma, right? Which I think that scene would not be written in 2022. I think in 1986 it was supposed to be tough love, and she actually cares for him, and she's saying the thing a man needs to hear for him to get back on track and fulfill his destiny. But now it would be like, you evil person, let this man grieve and...
Right. And it's a challenge. It's notable. Contrast that scene with a similar scene in Maverick between Penny and Mav, right? So, as you say, Charlie, it's bullying. It's tough love. It's basically it's provocative. It's provoking him and it's challenging his character, right?
In a way she knows he will respond to because she knows his immaturity and how damaged he is.
Contrast that with a similar scene in Maverick in which, right, there's been a training accident, right, that has nearly resulted in multiple of the trainees dying, and Mav is essentially relieved of his job by John Hamm,
right.
And we know that this is his last stint with the Navy, so this is it. And so basically his career's over, and he goes to Penny. He says, "This is it. I'm done." And she says, "No, you're not done." But she doesn't attack him as being cowardly or lacking the will. She says to him, "Those are your students. Those are your people. And if anything happens to them, you will never forgive yourself."
Yeah.
So she's appealing not to his kind of macho pride, but rather to his selflessness.
Yeah.
Right? To the heroic qualities.
Yeah.
And that's a critically important hinge, because it's the moment in which Maverick then goes back and actually shows the students that this mission can be done.
Yeah.
Like, and that risk that he's taking on is actually necessary, because the mission can't possibly succeed without him kind of supporting the students, at showing them that it can be done, and more than that, showing John Hamm's character that this can be done.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. All right, do we have anything else to discuss in the mythology section?
No.
I think not. I think we're done with this section. Okay. Okay, and we're back for our final section, in which we usually take the deepest of deep dives into the meaning or the readings that can be applied to this text, our critique section. I suppose the first thing I want to ask you, and we maybe alluded to this, and I don't know if we have the same views on this. Yeah. The conventional reading of certainly Top Gun, and probably Top Gun Maverick too, is that these are movies in support of patriotism, of hyper-militarism, certainly the first movie and arguably the second one too, patriarchy.
Uh-huh.
Is that true? Or is there a counter reading, a different reading?
Well, there's certainly a counter reading,
which
you're going to flesh out, and which I think is pretty persuasive. But again, I would just make the point that it's hard. We've got to make a judgment about how much it matters that the critique, particularly in Top Gun, to the extent that it exists, how much does it matter that it is so deeply buried that it is nearly impossible to pull out unless, I mean, it's one thing to pull out that critique now in 2023. I don't know how many people are pulling out that critique that you're going to make in 1986.
Okay,
so how much does it matter that, how under the surface does the critique have to be before it's no longer a critique?
Okay,
it's just not effective.
I understand what you're saying. I mean, maybe we should approach this in a different way, right? Which is, I should provide what I think is is the counter reading, and then we can get into whether it's obvious enough to make any difference. My sense of the first movie in particular is that it's commonly read as an endorsement of the patriarchy, an endorsement of hyper-militarism, as an extremely patriotic kind of pro-American movie. I think there is more than enough evidence in the text to suggest that a reading that posits that Maverick is a victim of these systems, is traumatized by these systems and nearly destroyed, and only through tremendous acts of personal resilience persists. I think there's more than enough evidence in that movie to suggest that it is exposing the flaws of patriarchy and hyper-male environments and hyper-militarism and the kind of sex death wish. Maverick is someone who is lied to by the military about the most important thing in his life, which is his father's death. But he's also absorbed by that military and kind of churned up and used for his talent and his kind of intuitive abilities by that military. His life and the life of his fellow pilots are not valued by this institution. In fact, whenever Maverick does anything wrong, the indictment of Maverick is not that was dangerous for life. The indictment is that's a $50 billion aircraft that the taxpayers own that aircraft. You don't own that aircraft. So it's an astonishing sort of expression of what the stakes are in this kind of situation. Maverick, as I've outlined, I don't think is a hedonistic purveyor of toxic masculinity. I think he's, at worst, a naive, defensive, performative exponent of toxic masculinity, but it's something that the patriarchy is damaging him and retarding his spiritual and intellectual growth, as much as it is anyone else in the movie. So I don't see these as pro-war, pro-masculinity movies, or at least I think it's possible to construct an argument that these are not pro-war, pro-masculinity movies. Now, your question is the interesting one, which is, at what point is the critique buried so deep that it's either an act of projection from me and seeing something that I want to be there because I've been taken in by the ideology and the jet planes, and I want to, I want to not be taken in. I want to intellectualize it, but it's not actually there. To what extent is that critique buried so deep that it doesn't actually exist, or it doesn't have any practical impact? I mean, I think there's two arguments to this, two responses to this. One is, this is popular culture, and the premise of our whole enterprise, of our podcast, is that popular culture carries political meaning, and that popular culture is particularly important because it is a political meaning that is available not only to the intellectual elite, but is of widespread import. And it is true that if the text buries its subversive or progressive critique so deeply that it is not accessible to the massive viewers, that the impact of popular culture loses its importance, and you might have written an academic journal article that no one will read, expressing your anti-patriarchal, anti-militaristic ideas. I suppose that's point one. Point two is, all popular culture texts and society, progressive society, needs the mediating impact of the critic to point out the alternate ways in which they can be read. And it is by injecting those ideas into the societal bloodstream that progressive change can be had. And if that's not true, then why are me and you employed by the state of Connecticut?
I would...
which is maybe a broader question.
The only thing I would counter with is, where is this critique at the time? Right? Can anybody make that critique in the context in which in the historical and cultural context in which the movie appears? Or is it, do we need the distance? And not just the distance in time in real life, but do we need the second movie? Do we need a different kind of story that exposes different elements? I think significantly different elements of the Maverick character in order to go back and see what we can see now in the first movie. Well,
so let me put this back to you in a different way. You mentioned as a contemporaneous movie to Top Gun with a different sort of ideology, the Rambo First Blood, the first Rambo movie. You, as a sort of aware moviegoer, you could very easily watch First Blood and then go and watch Top Gun, or have First Blood in your memory, and would not First Blood really shape the way that you're receiving Top Gun? Would not these kind of tensions in the military machine and the way in which it's acting upon this clearly traumatized individual? I mean, Maverick, this is a clear theme in both the first and the second Top Gun. It's arguably even clearer in the first Top Gun, which is these men are not presented. They are presented as kind of thrusting athletic specimens, but spiritually and intellectually, they are profoundly damaged and traumatized by the very institution that we're led to believe is being promoted by these movies, in a similar way to which John Rambo is traumatized.
I agree, but don't you think that theme is much clearer and much more effectively told in First Blood?
I think it is more. I think it is more on the nose in First Blood, and I hadn't seen First Blood. I don't think before. But I rewatched it because you mentioned it in the past week, and it's an astonishing movie. It's stunning, and especially like I was just open mouthed in the last 5 minutes or whatever, where Rambo's talking to his commanding officer, and it's extremely moving, and it's very important for people who only know Sylvester Stallone from his later career to go back and watch, or even the later movies in his major franchises, to go back and watch the first Rocky and the first Rambo, and he's a really astonishing actor in those movies. Now, what was your question? How did it go off on this?
Well,
is it not much more apparent?
Yes,
I think I think it's just it is a different way of telling a story.
Yes.
Okay. And I would suggest, and maybe again I'm too, I'm seeing curves around corners where they don't really exist. But if I was a very subversive Tony Scott or Tom Cruise, I would lead everyone very far down this path of rah-rah militarism, while simultaneously including its own critique, and in some ways that's even more powerful because you're kind of getting right to the belly of the beast with what seems to be, that I'm totally mixing metaphors here, the Trojan horse. This is a pro-war movie that's going to be received as pro-war, but is actually insidiously implanting ideas that are devastating to that ideology in a way that means they're going to be swallowed, to again add a third metaphor to this mix, swallowed by people who think they're getting one thing but they're actually getting something else.
Right. And they will be swallowed, but will they ever come back up?
This depends upon your faith in the great American viewing public.
Yeah. And I will say, I think Maverick is also, the second movie, is more effective on this, because there's that one, great scene between Maverick and John Hamm towards the beginning of the movie, in which, John Hamm is talking about the objectives of this mission, right? It's to go in and it's to complete the mission. These people, they know that this is their job to complete the mission. And Maverick says poignantly twice, and to come home.
Yes.
And to come home, which is not something that John Hamm agrees with, right? And shows no interest whatsoever. So there is the way in which, in both of these movies where the pilots themselves are clearly offered up as expendable sacrificial lambs if need be, right? And so there is, I think it's more effective in the sequel.
Yeah.
But it definitely exists in Top Gun as well. It's not just to celebrate. These pilots are simultaneously celebrated and lauded as the elite of the elite, but they're also, they'd be fine with them dying. If you die, that's fine. Right.
What are we to make of another point we alluded to earlier, the fact that no enemy is ever named, which is presented, within the movie, within the words of the producers and the directors as we don't want to make we're not
non-political.
We're truly on both sides of the fence here, true centrists here.
Yeah.
But actually opens the way for a view of America's relationship with the world, which is one of constant, interchangeable conflict.
Well, but I think
and is a critique of that way of American engagement.
I think that critique is informed by the sequel more so than the original, because I think it's pretty obvious in Top Gun that we're dealing with Soviets here.
Yeah, okay.
And they don't call them that, but you're right. I mean, we're talking about.
Why not say that though? What was the? I mean, I know why they didn't name. There were sensitivities about the Chinese market in particular for the second movie, and there were Chinese investors in the movie, and it's a major cinematic market. But I don't think the Soviet Union was a major cinematic market.
There were a lot of these movies, though, that gestured very clearly towards the Soviets, but didn't explicitly.
Like, what's the one where there's an invasion and the high schoolers fight them off? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Red Dawn.
Red Dawn is the same way. There's another fighter pilot knockoff movie.
Firefox. Were you thinking of that?
No.
The Clint Eastwood?
No, I'm not thinking of the Clint Eastwood one, but this one had Louis Gossett Jr. in it. And it's kind of, I can't remember the name of it, but it's infamous for actually recycling some of the exact fighting scenes from Top Gun.
Oh, really?
and in that one, right, it's almost exactly the same, but they also don't explicitly name the Soviets, right? So it was a kind of a convention, right, of the age that, everybody knows who you're talking about, right? But they don't explicitly name why. Who knows?
Yeah.
Right. Maybe there was the sense that it would make things more difficult, unnecessarily difficult, and why bother when everybody already knows what we're talking about? But I think when we learn in Maverick that in Top Gun Maverick that Maverick has been flying in all of these conflicts, right? And the newest conflict is just some other
rogue nation,
some other group of bad intended actors.
Yeah, isn't it Penny who says, they recount their history and why he's always leaving, and he's like, well, and then you went to Bosnia, and you went to Iraq twice, and then you went to Afghanistan, and then you went to, and you're thinking like, my goodness, that was a lot of wars in the time between these two movies.
And I think the point is that it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
From Maverick's perspective, it doesn't matter. He doesn't care. Right. And so that's the other thing why it's not. The second movie, I'm not sure how patriotic it is. Is it patriotic? It's not particularly nationalistic. It's not particularly patriotic. The enemies are literally faceless. Right. The only time we ever see is an enemy is when they're flying in it's a jet fighter
with the helmets.
With the helmets completely covering. Right. It may as well be, aliens.
Right.
Right. For all we know, and it doesn't matter.
Yes.
That's the point.
Yes.
Right. But I think you need Top Gun Maverick to kind of come to those conclusions. Because I think it is pretty obvious in Top Gun who the enemy is. Okay,
fair enough. All right. Yeah. We should move to, I think maybe the last topic that we'll discuss today, which is the theory that originated, I think, in an article in Vulture and was then written about in the New York Times and some other places.
It's unclear. I mean, the Bulwark, right, is actually line dated a couple of days before
it
Vulture.
Is?
Now, who knows what that means?
Okay, so I found that article too. A Sonny Bunch in the Bulwark, who anyway the theory, whatever its provenance, is a fascinating one. It is a way of rereading the second movie. Almost entirely, that completely changes the meaning of the movie. And the theory is this, that the first, 15 minutes of Top Gun Maverick are real. They happen. And Maverick has, he's been living in his hangar, doing his test flight things. The test flight does in fact take place. But when the plane explodes, Maverick in fact dies. And so the rest of the movie is... there's different versions of this theory. It's the last milliseconds of his life flashing before his eyes. It's a purgatory or Maverick in the Bardo type scenario where he's atoning for his sins and revisiting the major episodes of his life and kind of making them right and making peace. And the kind of evidence for this, there are a few bits of evidence for the theory, although it doesn't require any. This is why it's perfect, because the movie is entirely viewable through the lens that it's a real story, and the lens that only the first 15 minutes are real, and for the last 2 hours or whatever, Maverick's dead and it's a death dream that he's having. The evidence for this is just the physics of the test flight. For the plane to explode at whatever it was, Mach 10.3
he gets to.
Yeah. The human body cannot sustain being flung from an aircraft at anything like that velocity.
Right.
It's just impossible. It's not like hard or only Maverick could do it. It's just like a physical human impossibility. It's not clear that he does eject. If you watch the thing closely, you made this point this morning, that he futzes with some controls and he knows it's all gone wrong.
Yeah.
But it's not clear he presses the eject button. And eject things are things he famously has trouble with in both movies, right? That always seems to go wrong for him.
Yeah.
And there are very stylized elements of the movie when it enters, if we assume Maverick is dead, the Bardo phase. Like, where does he land? He seems to land in 1950s Montana or something.
Yeah.
It's bizarre. There's all these people in a diner with, plaid shirts on from the 50s. The whole of the rest of the movie seems like bizarrely out of time. There's very little that pins it to being in 2022. Maverick has a BlackBerry, but that's about it. But even the texting is surreal. Right, it's extremely precise. They use punctuation. He doesn't do anything else on the BlackBerry other than text. Iceman. It's a really weird use of electronics. The fashion and the look of the movie are really ahistorical. They're somewhere between. All the characters look like they're in either 1986, but then in 1986 they look like they were in 1950 anyway. Like the whole thing takes place in this surreal.
Penny's Bar, for example, is a really good example of this, right? This is a bar that's got a pool table, it's got a dartboard, it's got an old school jukebox,
a piano
with an old school piano, right?
And it's run by
cowbells that she rings.
And there's about 1,000 people in all the time, and it's run by Penny and some vague old dude who wanders back and forth. And then at one point, Penny's gone. I don't know where she's gone. It's like, well, who's going to run the bar tonight? Walter, or whoever you are. And many surreal scenes take place in that. In that very setting. It seems to be the most supernatural of the settings in the movie. And in particular, the most famous one that I think is the big tell that this theory might be true is after Maverick gets thrown out of the bar, he's forced to watch Goose's son Rooster, the embodiment of Goose, reenact the Great Balls of Fire. And Maverick is excluded from it. And why is he excluded from it? It's because he's dead. You know?
Yeah.
So what do you make of this?
There's another way.
Yeah.
So I actually think that there's potentially more powerful evidence even. Right? That this is really onto something here, which is the change in Maverick character between before the test plane explodes and then everything that happens after. And this kind of piggybacks on what I was saying earlier about how I have a hard time imagining these two characterizations as of being of the same person. Think back to the first 15 minutes of the movie, right, of Top Gun Maverick. What do we see out of him? Well, we see a very lonely guy, right, who doesn't seem to have anything in his life. The camera does fixate on his monthly calendar, and I actually went in and really paid close attention to what was marked on the calendar. It's all work stuff.
Yes.
There's nothing about hobbies. There's nothing about, and including on weekends, right? There's nothing. You know, he hasn't marked anybody's birthday. He's just consumed completely with his job. He lives in a hangar, apparently. And it seems like he reads technical manuals for, in his off time. Then think about what happens. Why does the plane explode? Right? He's met the goal. Like, he hit Mach 10, right? But he keeps pushing it and pushing it. Why? What's the value in that? Right? Allegedly, the only thing that has to happen for the possibility of maintaining the project and not having it shut down is for it to hit Mach 10.
Right.
So why does he keep going? Well, it's because there's this kind of, devil may care, I look at me, I can do the things that other people can't do. There's kind of a authority that's going on there as well. It's all pretty consistent with a lot of what we see out of the original movie, right? This kind of, ability to be boisterous and, a word that you like, insouciant, right? That doesn't happen ever again.
Yeah.
In the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
He is, in ways that I was trying to articulate earlier, a pretty profoundly different person for the rest of the movie than in those first 15 minutes. And he behaves as one can imagine is his very, what happens right in the rest of the movie? Well, let's tick off his regrets. We know them one by one.
The things that he's trying to make right.
Okay. So, he wanted to be a Top Gun instructor and a mentor to others, and he failed out of that miserably. So what does he do? He goes back, and he becomes not just an effective Top Gun, like a heroic instructor. Literally saves students' lives, right?
Right.
What else does he...
and gets to be not only the teacher, but also the lead pilot on the mission.
Yeah. See, he's got profound regrets over his disintegrating relationship with Rooster, right? That he's tried to act as a father figure, but it's failed. He knows that it's failed. So what happens here? That relationship is repaired and rescued.
Right.
His relationship with Penny, which he clearly has profound regrets over, right? This is a lifelong on-again, off-again relationship. They're clearly meant for each other, but they can't get along, right? Well, is there any hint in the rest of the movie that these two aren't just absolutely perfect fits?
Yes.
They don't have even a single disagreement.
Yes.
There's not even a single sideways glance.
Right.
So what is the tension that for a lifetime has kept them apart?
Yeah.
Suddenly dissolved and gone. Everything that happens, it seems to me, it's all about reconciling all of his major regrets.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. In a way that leads Maverick to be his projected best self.
Yes.
Right? And I think that's different than what we see in the first 15 minutes.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I suppose I'm going to come down against this theory. And this is why. Because I think this theory allows for less growth in the Maverick character.
Yes.
Because all of the growth comes
does.
after he's dead.
Yes.
And I suppose you could say it's kind of positive that his projected best self is not just he got to sleep with 10 more women and killed 30 more, of the indistinct enemy. Yeah. He knew he had a better self, I suppose you would say is the best thing you could say about Maverick's death dream, if that's really what happened. But I prefer the idea, and I think the two movies work better in continuity with one another. If there are redeemable elements in young Maverick that are present in the 25-year-old that are paid off in the 60-year-old, then if the real Maverick is permanently stuck at 25, and then only gets redemption in the Death Dream, I think you like and maybe lean towards the Maverick in the Bardo explanation,
sort of do.
because it allows you to maintain that negative view of the Maverick character, while still enjoying the second movie and finding it a less obnoxious or alienating experience.
I would reframe it because I think it's meaningful, right? That what the Bardo experience makes clear is that Maverick he has a self-awareness.
Yeah, he knows he fell short.
Right? That is the actual trigger towards growth.
Yeah.
Right? And So I would reframe that. I don't think it's a tragedy necessarily.
Okay.
Right? I think it's, it points to, I mean, it's come late, right? But
it is the last millisecond of his life.
The last millisecond.
Couldn't get much later.
He didn't conjure it from out of nowhere.
No, he'd been living with these.
Right.
Yeah.
So it points to could be a lack of opportunity, a lack of will, right?
Yes.
But it actually, I think, makes the character more sympathetic.
Yeah.
Right, rather than just kind of freezing the character in this eternal state of
that's interesting,
of immature.
And it does solve a cinematographic or a narrative mystery in the movie, which is why there are no deaths in this movie.
Yes,
right. Which
there should be.
That to parallel the first one, which they did in every other respect, there should be a major death, and the whole narrative seems to be leading.
It's an impossible mission.
Seems to be leading
2 miracles, Stephen.
Yeah, well, and actually to
3 miracles because they got to get out. And not get shot down.
Yeah, but John Hamm says 2 because he doesn't care about the third one. But there's even more foreshadowing because Maverick says at one point early in the movie, the first time he sees the mission, he's like, "No, someone's not coming back from this."
Exactly.
And it's just classical.
And he says it over and over again,
foreshadowing that it would be him.
Yeah.
Who's not? And then the act of the way in which he would have died, in which it was logical he was going to die, and the whole weight of the movie in narrative terms, and then just in very obvious cinematographic terms, in terms of the choice of music and of shots and all the rest of it, is leading you to think that when Maverick takes the missile from Rooster, that is Maverick's death scene, and it's heroic and it's a crescendo, and it's satisfying because it would be redeeming the loss of Goose by saving Goose's son, which is the number one thing Goose would want his best friend to do if he could do anything more for him. And Maverick doesn't die. And actually the last sort of 15 minutes of the movie are really quite strange in a way that comes close, I think, to a misstep.
Yes.
Which is, all of a sudden, they're like behind enemy lines, and it's a different movie.
Yeah. But the Maverick and the Bardo moment could be...
Oh, he could die at that point.
It could be later.
So there are actually 2 possible Maverick in the back. 1, he dies in the test flight. 2, he does actually die saving Rooster. And then he has this death dream where they kind of tool across the enemy airfield. And the tone of that is weird. They suddenly start cracking jokes. Whereas it's been unbelievably serious. There's been no music throughout that whole mission. You're like, my God, someone's going to die. And it's really good movie making. It's really tense. It's really immersive. But it then seems strange to have the sort of almost comic relief of, and then they're in the F-14 from 1986, and you expect that they'll turn the car radio on, and Kenny Loggins is on,
and then they're then he's reenacting in that final death dream. He's back with Goose.
Yeah, and he's they're flying they're flying together in a way that's probably not plausible given the technological gap between a 1986 aircraft and a 2020 aircraft, and the whole thing seems strange. In a way that does suggest there's something surreal going on. Super interesting.
Yes.
So I think taken as a whole, I mean, I wasn't worried. You were worried there would be nothing to talk about in this movie. I think we've given the light to that, and this is actually a relatively rich political text.
Yes.
Or maybe we're just good at BSing our way through discussion.
I think there's a lot more here than I would have thought. I mean, it's obvious at this point, but I liked the second movie a lot more than the first one, even upon reviewing.